In this video, I'm going to show you how to brew worm casting tea, utilizing my homemade worm castings and answer the most commonly asked questions about brewing this liquid gold. I've been making worm castings out of my kitchen scraps for years, utilizing this 5-gallon worm casting system. And one of the best ways that you can utilize its magic is by making worm casting tea. So first off, what are worm castings? Well, I've got my system right here, and what I've done is establish a system where I can continuously add food scraps, and my worms are working in here, eating what's left over and pooping out all of the rest. Just like us, we eat what we need, and what we don't comes out the other end. But in this case, worm castings are absolutely amazing and magic for what they can do out in the garden. When worms are eating all of those extra food scraps, there's a lot of beneficial things that are happening as it travels through their intestines to come out on the other side as worm castings. They're pre-digesting all of that food. They're adding beneficial microorganisms to the worm castings, and we can utilize all of these benefits and apply them to our garden with some amazing results. So instead of throwing away my food scraps, and I don't mean everything, I'm not putting any meat, dairy, onions, or citrus into here, but any extra vegetable scraps or strawberry tops, apple cores, all of that I'm putting into here rather than throwing it in my garbage, which is just gonna go to a landfill mixed with all the other stuff that we're throwing in there, and it's gonna take forever to break down. So rather than doing that, I'm taking all of that material and energy and putting it into my worm composting bin to make my own worm castings that I can use as a free resource to supercharge my garden. So now that we know what worm castings are, what is worm casting tea? And essentially what we're doing is taking some of our worm castings that we've created and mixing it with water to brew a worm casting tea in order to extract all of those benefits into more material. We don't have a lot of worm castings in here, but we can brew a tea in order to make a larger volume so that way we can supply those benefits all across our garden. So my worm composting system here has 3 buckets, and this top bucket is where all of the worms are currently living. This is where all the work is happening right now. And then the bucket below it here is full of worm castings. This is what the worms have broken down into beautiful worm castings that we're going to use today in order to create our worm casting tea. I mean, this stuff right here is absolutely gorgeous. And I could just go ahead and apply this directly to my garden. By making a tea, I could take a very, very small amount of material and infuse it into a tea and then use that larger volume to broadcast all of those benefits across my garden. One thing that I absolutely do not want you to do is use this liquid right here. This liquid at the bottom of my worm composting system is not worm casting tea. It's better known as leachate. It's basically all of the extra moisture that is produced from the system, and all of that is just falling through. I mean, look how much of it is in here. But all of that excess moisture was in the system that was able to leak down my worm composting system into this bottom bucket where I'm able to capture all of that moisture, because we want to create an ideal environment for these worms to work. And if it's too moist, they're not going to survive. But what I don't want you to do is use this leachate on your garden. You can put it around the base of your trees or berry bushes or shrubs. What you don't want to do is use this leachate as a worm casting tea on your plants. We want to extract all of the benefits from our worm castings and apply that across our garden. And if you're wondering what actually makes worm casting so special, It's the ability for it to actually supercharge your soil, which helps to feed your plants. When you're adding fertilizer to your soil, you're not actually directly feeding the plants. What you're doing is feeding the microbiology that lives in the soil, which is breaking down all of those fertilizers, vitamins, minerals, nutrients into a form that your plants can actually uptake. So when you're taking something like worm castings and adding it to your soil, what you're doing is injecting a ton of beneficial microbes into your soil, which is then supercharging your soil to be able to feed your plants. And that's why we see such a significant difference in a plant's overall growth and potential after we apply worm castings or use worm casting tea. All right, so let's make some worm casting tea. And the way that I like to do it is by using a food grade 5-gallon bucket. Food grade plastics are much more stable than any other plastics that you can find, and they're not going to break down and add any plastics into your garden, which we absolutely don't want. So anytime you can, always go for a high density plastic like food grade plastic, especially in this circumstance. And what we're gonna do is add some water. And you want to use unchlorinated water because if we add chlorine to this, it's going to kill all of the microbes that we add and it's going to have actually a negative effect. We're going to only wind up adding a very, very trace amount of nutrients. So, what I like to use is a water filter, and I've got one here from GreenGro, and this is going to remove any of the chlorine that's coming out of my spigot. But you can also collect some water from the rain, or you can just fill up this 5-gallon bucket with water a day or two ahead of time and just let all that chlorine off gas, and then it should be okay. But I like the convenience. I want to make it when I want to make it, so I'm going to go ahead and use my water filter. And I'm just going to fill up my 5-gallon bucket. Just like any tea, we need some water to steep it in. Now we're going to incorporate the worm castings. What I'm going to use to extract the worm castings into the water is a cotton bag, something like this. Something that's porous. I like to use cotton because it's organic. And what I'm going to do is just take a couple handfuls of my worm castings and try to do your best. There might be some worms that are lingering in there still, and just take them out. But look at this stuff again. It's just amazing. I'm going to take a couple handfuls, is really all it takes. And the nice thing is, even after you make the tea, you could still use these worm castings out in the garden. Throw them around your fruit trees or your shrubs. Whatever you put it in, it's going to love it. So I'm just going to take a couple handfuls of my worm castings and put it inside of this porous bag. It needs to be porous because when we drop this in here, just like a tea bag, we want all of this to get incorporated into the water. So before I drop this in, I'm gonna change this camera angle so we can see if there's any immediate change. All right, so I'm gonna drop this in here. Oh, look at that already. It's already starting to steep it out. Just that immediate color change is literally like making a fresh cup of tea. Now, honestly, we could just leave this bag in here for like 4 to 6 hours and immediately use it and apply it to our garden. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, and I'm going to show you 2 more steps that I'm going to take to make this worm casting tea even better, even more powerful. But just know, if you kind of wanted to do it in a rush, you could just leave it in here for 4 to 6 hours, but I wouldn't really go any longer than that. And the reason being is because when you're mixing your worm castings with water, you're creating an anaerobic environment where getting rid of all of the oxygen, which is needed for all of those beneficial microbes. But the longer that they're sitting in here for, those aerobic beneficial microbes are going to die off and those anaerobic microbes are going to take over. And that's not what we want to add to our garden. The whole point of doing this process is to make the worm castings better and be able to broadcast it over a larger area, not just to make something quick, and that's a little bit better. We want to supercharge this brew. So what I'm gonna do is add a little bit of organic blackstrap molasses. And I just got a fresh bottle specifically for this because I haven't made worm casting tea in a while. It's gonna be a huge part of my overall content strategy this year. I'm gonna be trying a lot of new things this year to really amplify my garden. And I have this system that I'm working on that will automatically inject worm castings into my garden when it's watered. So if you're really into all of these homesteading videos or just gardening videos, but want to try to be more efficient with your time and also making free amendments for your garden, definitely subscribe to our channel. I've got some really, really exciting stuff coming out really soon. So what I'm doing by adding this blackstrap molasses is providing a food source for all of those microbes. Our microbes can go through generations within a few hours, and not to mention days. They are going to populate this 5-gallon bucket full of tea so fast. And by adding a food source of sugar, as well as a ton of vitamins and minerals that it's known to be in blackstrap molasses, we're going to be feeding these microbes, and they're just going to multiply and be so happy inside of this brew. And that's exactly what we want to do. Let's see how this tastes. That's strong. Woo-hoo! But taking this extra step is really going to amplify everything that we're doing here. These microbes are going to be so happy. And the last thing that I'm going to do to start actually brewing this tea is circulate air through the whole brew. And I'm going to do that with a simple fish tank pump. As I said, I don't want this to turn anaerobic. I want this to stay aerobic. And by providing the microbes some food from the molasses and introducing an abundance of fresh air, the population in this brew is just going to absolutely explode. So I have my air pump with a couple air stones on the bottom, and I'm just gonna stick that in there. We're gonna plug this in, and we're just gonna let it go for 24 hours. You can see it and hear it just bubbling away. What you want to do is find a location that's out of direct sun, somewhere in the shade. You can even bring it inside. But my tip for finding the right condition or location is you want the temperature or the environment, the climate, to be similar to where you're going to apply the worm casting tea. Are you going to do a foliar spray? Are you going to spray it on the leaves for some added benefits to the leaves of the plants? Or are you going to dump it on the soil as a soil drench in order to feed the microbes in the soil? The best way to figure out what environment they're living in is by taking a thermometer and sticking it into the ground of your soil, or understanding the temperatures outside. If it's an 80-degree day and you're going to do a foliar spray, leave your tea outside and just let it brew at ambient temperature. Then the microbe population that's forming is going to be used to those conditions. Same thing with the soil. Take a probe, stick it in the soil, understand your soil temperature. Maybe it's in the 70s. Then it's probably better off for you to bring it inside to a more temperature controlled climate. I mean, most of us live in homes that are probably around 70, 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and that would probably be perfect to match your soil conditions. So take a minute and just think about where the best place for you to put your brew is, so that way you can get the best results when you actually go and apply it in your garden. All right, so it's been about 24 hours, and now it's time to see just how well it is brewed. And smelling it, you can smell that molasses smell just slightly, but it doesn't smell bad. That's the key point. And that's why we did this aeration process. But let's take our mason jar here, stick it in here, and let's see. Oh, that's beautiful. We've got a light brown color, kind of like a weak coffee, you know. But this is exactly the color that we're looking for. If it was like a really, really dark brown or like a sludge, what you could do is just dilute it, mix it like 1 to 1 with water, and then use that to water your garden. But this is gonna this is gonna go great. The plants are absolutely gonna love this. So let's go water. Now that we've got our brew, we want to do the best that we can to use it as soon as possible. Why did we add the water, add the molasses, add the air? In order to build that population of microbes. This tea is alive, and we want to do the best that we can to apply it to our garden as soon as possible. And we don't want to have any leftovers because it could potentially go anaerobic, and then we're adding the wrong type of microbes to our garden. So, luckily for me, my garden's pretty big. I'm going to use this maybe between 2 to 3 garden beds, so I know it's all going to go away. But if you have a small garden, don't be stingy. You're not going to harm your garden by adding too much worm casting tea. It's a very, very trace amount of vitamins and minerals. It's packed full of beneficial microbes. The only thing that could potentially happen is you add too many microbes that your soil can handle, and some of them just die off, which is going to happen naturally. But you cannot harm your plants by adding too much worm casting tea. I mean, let's get real. If you add too much of it, you could probably have some negative effects. But even if I put this whole 5 gallon bucket on a single garden bed, nothing bad is going to happen. Honestly, probably exactly the opposite. So I've got my makeshift watering can here with the spoon on the end just to get a nice broadcast over this garden bed. But when you're watering using your worm castings, you want to make sure that your soil is moist. You don't want your soil to be dry. So you might actually want to water your soil beforehand or maybe do it after a light rain because you want those microbes that we just work so hard to create to have an ideal environment once they actually hit the soil. We want that population to rise in the soil to help feed your plants. So, just do a quick soil test. Just take your finger and stick it in the soil and just digging, taking some of this mulch off the top here, I can see that my soil is moist. So these microbes are going to be very, very happy once I get them in here. But as I mentioned, you can also do a foliar spray, and this is actually really beneficial after just transplanting your plants because they're not going to have an established root system like our established plants do. So if you're noticing some transplant shock, like we've talked about in previous videos this year, you can actually use this as a great remedy to kind of mitigate that because you're just applying all of those micronutrients, macronutrients, and microbes that are going to help to protect those leaves and help your plants to absorb all that needed energy in order to help the plant establish. So there's just so many great uses for worm castings. I mean, at the end of the day, there's really nothing special at all about this process. But the only thing is, I don't have a ton of it, so I want to make sure that I'm doing a good job broadcasting this over my garden bed. This is only a 2 gallon watering can, and I only want to use this much for my garden bed because I want that 5 gallons to go a long way. It's going to take multiple brews in order for me to actually distribute this amongst my whole garden. And I've got a couple garden beds over here that I just reset. So I've got my bag of worm castings that I use to make the brew, and I'm just going to take it and just sprinkle it over my soil, mix it in, and these garden beds are just going to be so happy and so productive. Literally from kitchen scraps to gardening gold. Utilizing worm castings is one of the easiest, cheapest, and most effective ways that you can supercharge your garden for loads of productivity. As you saw today, it is such an essential part of a organic and thriving garden, and I really really recommend that you try to implement these practices whether you're growing a small or large garden alike. If you like this video, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel for more composting and other gardening tips. And let me know in the comments, have you brewed worm casting tea before? Or are you planning on brewing your first batch after watching this video? And if you want to start making your own worm castings at home, here's a video that you can watch on how I created my indoor worm composting system so I can continuously create worm castings from my kitchen scraps all throughout the year. Thanks for coming along with me on this one. I hope you got a ton out of it, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.